A friend told me that my wife was having a romantic dinner with another man at his restaurant. At the time, my blood boiled. I was stunned. Within seconds, a wave of thoughts consumed me: betrayal, lies, contempt. Everything we built until now, the years of trust, the moments when she looked into my eyes and said she loved me. Suddenly, that information crushed any feelings I might have had for her. My first impulse: I wanted to confront her. But what would that change? I knew the answer. The betrayal was already there, in front of me. I could feel the bitter taste of humiliation burning my throat. So I sent the message that seemed inevitable: enjoy dinner, it's over between us. I imagined her reaction. Shocked, maybe panicked. What could she say now? But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to listen to your excuses. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling at that moment: raw, suffocating pain. Because there, at the exact moment I sent that message, something inside me broke. And there was no turning back. The hours dragged by. I waited for some response, something that showed regret, a confession, or maybe even denial. But nothing. She simply remained silent. Every minute that passed without any word from her was like a knife sinking deeper into my chest. Then the mind starts to wander. How have I not seen this before? The nights she came home late, saying she was tired. The dinners where I used my cell phone, avoiding my eyes. It was obvious. How was I so blind? Maybe I refused to see what was right in front of me. The heart, when it clings, ignores the signs. But there, deep down, something always knew. I was overcome with an urgency to do something, anything. I called her. P.O. Box. I called again. Silence. My mind was already creating 1,000 scenarios. Was she in his arms now? Would you be laughing at me? Would he be better than me? I had to know. I wanted more than a dry, cold message. I needed to confront her, face to face. I didn't sleep that night. Anxiety ran rampant through my veins, and every little memory of us was a blade ripping through my chest. The promises, the plans, everything seemed like an illusion. A theater in which I was the last to realize I was being deceived. I walked back and forth, waiting for some news, for an answer that never came. Maybe she was still with him. Perhaps. The next morning she returned home. I watched her walk through the door with a smile on her face, as if nothing had happened. My eyes fixed on her, searching for any trace of guilt. And then, I said, straight up, bluntly, "Where were you?" She hesitated. There was no running away now. I knew the truth. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately decipher. Was it confusion? Or shame? And then, the explanation came. But it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't what you thought. These words echoed in the room like a gunshot. Wasn't that what I was thinking? What else could it be? She continued, trying to justify it, explaining that the man she was with was not what he seemed. And suddenly, doubt began to eat away at my anger. "Do you think I would do that to you?" she asked, her voice shaking. She looked so convincing, so sure she hadn't done anything wrong. I wanted to believe. I wanted to hold on to anything other than what I feared. But something still didn't fit. Why lie? Why not say it from the beginning? And as she spoke, a part of me wanted to believe her. I wanted it to be true, for it all to be a big misunderstanding. But then, why the silence? Why didn't you respond to the message? Why did you pretend everything was fine? I watched her for a long time. Every word that came out of his mouth seemed planned, rehearsed. She insisted that she was trying to resolve something important, something she couldn't tell me at that moment. But what could be so serious, so secret, that it needed to be hidden from me? "You're lying," I said, interrupting his explanation. She stepped back, surprised. Maybe she didn't expect me to confront her like this. And that's when I saw it in her eyes, she was hiding something. There was more to that story than she was willing to admit. I knew. And she knew that I knew. But what was it? Why would she meet another man, at night, in an expensive restaurant, without even telling me? I wanted answers. I demanded answers. Yet something still held me, something she hadn't said yet, something I felt would change everything. I needed to know. What was she hiding? The first rays of sunlight entered through the bedroom window, bathing the furniture in a soft, golden light. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Lucas ran his fingers through the crumpled sheets, his mind floating between the details of a routine that, until then, he considered stable. The house, a spacious residence in a quiet California neighborhood, reflected the life he and Camila had built over the years. Everything there had their mark on it, the photos on the living room wall, the plants in the garden that Camila loved so much, the literature books that Lucas accumulated on the shelves. Each corner told a story, pieces of a marriage that seemed invulnerable. Camila, a woman with a calm presence and expressive eyes, has always been the center of Lucas' life. They met in college, when they were both studying law, and since then, their lives have become intertwined in a way that seems unbreakable. While Lucas continued his career as a lawyer, Camila chose a different path. Legal practice was never her true desire, and soon after a few years of work, she dedicated herself to managing a small art gallery in the city. It was what made her happy. The two always supported each other's choices, and this complicity was what Lucas valued most in their marriage. In the early years, the two built a life full of simple adventures, filled with trips and intimate dinners. The relationship seemed unshakable, based on mutual respect and the deep connection they shared. However, as time passed, routine took over. Not abruptly, but in a subtle transition. Work, commitments and adult life began to create invisible barriers between them, until, without either of them noticing, long conversations at night turned into quick monosyllables, and spontaneous affection became just part of a memory. Distant. Over the past few months, Lucas had begun to feel that something had changed. Camila, always so present and transparent, seemed distant. There were more nights when she arrived late from the gallery, more excuses for work meetings or cultural events that, for some reason, Lucas was not invited to attend. He noticed small changes, things that hadn't existed before. Her cell phone was always on silent, face down on the table, and a constant feeling that she was somewhere else, even when she was physically next to him. However, Lucas was never one to confront immediately. His trust in Camila was always absolute, and he refused to let suspicions or insecurities corrode what he believed to be a solid relationship. But the feeling of strangeness persisted. He watched from afar, not wanting to ask, not wanting to know the answer he feared. While Lucas was lost in these thoughts, Camila was a few meters away, in the kitchen, preparing coffee. His movements were light, but his mind was far away. She knew that Lucas was watching her, that something inside him was beginning to question the routine they had established. But, at the same time, Camila was carrying the weight of a decision that she had not yet been able to verbalize. It wasn't that she had stopped loving Lucas. On the contrary, in many moments, she felt deeply grateful for the life they built together. But there was something, a restlessness that had been growing within her lately, something she couldn't ignore. The days of work at the gallery were intense, but that wasn't what left her exhausted. It was the feeling that your life had somehow stagnated. The dreams she had in her youth of exploring the world and constantly challenging herself had been replaced by a predictable routine. Even surrounded by art and culture, something inside Camila seemed dormant. She and Lucas rarely argued. This was a fact that many friends envied, but for Camila, that comfortable silence between them was starting to feel more like a barrier. She missed something that, perhaps, Lucas couldn't offer. And it was this emptiness that made her look for answers in other places, in other situations, far from the life that she and Lucas had created. That morning, the silence between the two was palpable. Lucas watched Camilla's back as she finished putting the coffee on the table, and for a brief moment, he almost asked what was going on in her head. But, as on many other occasions, the words died before reaching his mouth. He took the cup of coffee and thanked her with a weak smile. "I need to stop by the gallery earlier today," Camilla said, breaking the silence. "We have an important meeting about a new exhibition." Lucas nodded, without looking up from his cup. He was already used to these unexpected commitments, although, this time, something in her posture bothered him. He felt a pang of frustration, but as always, he swallowed his emotions and wished her a good day. Hours later, in the office, Lucas couldn't concentrate. The words on the computer got jumbled, and his mind returned to Camilla. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. It was like trying to scoop water with his hands. The harder he tried, the more the sensation slipped through his fingers. It was then that the phone rang. The name that appeared on the screen made his stomach turn. It was a longtime friend, someone he didn't see often but trusted. The voice on the other end of the line sounded hesitant, almost as if it didn't want to be making the call. "Dude. I need to tell you something." The serious tone in his friend's voice made Lucas' heart accelerate. "I don't know how to tell you this, but I think you need to know. Last night, I saw Camilla at the restaurant, but she wasn't alone." Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. For a moment, the world around him fell silent, and the only thing he could hear was the sound of his own heart pounding against his chest. He tried to process what his friend had just said, but it was as if his mind was in denial. "Like this?" he managed to ask, his voice weak. "I saw her, with another man. They were having dinner together. It was strange." Lucas felt his blood run cold in his veins. Anger began to boil within him, but there was also a suffocating feeling of disbelief. It couldn't be true. Camilla? The woman he had known for so long, who shared his life, his dreams. How could she do this? He hung up the phone abruptly, unable to hear anything else. His hands shook as he picked up his cell phone to send the message that would change everything. Every word typed was a blade cutting deep into his emotions. "Enjoy dinner, it's all over between us." Lucas pressed the send button and, at that moment, he felt a mixture of relief and despair. Something inside him knew that, after that message, nothing would be the same as before. But he also knew that he could not continue in the darkness of doubt. Camilla, on the other hand, upon receiving the message, felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at the phone for long seconds, not believing what she was seeing. The feeling that everything was about to fall apart hit her hard. Lucas stared at his cell phone as if the words on the screen could change how he felt. The message he had sent hung in the air, filled with anger and hurt, but the silence that followed was even more disturbing. Camilla didn't respond, and that only reinforced the suspicion that was growing inside him like a slow poison. He looked around his office, trying to focus on anything other than the throbbing pain, but it was impossible. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the world had collapsed on his shoulders. Hours passed, and nothing. Not a call, not a simple request for an explanation. Just an oppressive void. Every minute of silence was a confirmation, a cruel blow to everything he believed to have been real. Camilla's face passed through his mind incessantly, the smile he loved so much, the way she always seemed to be present and, at the same time, distant in the last few months. Now he knew why. The pain of this realization left him paralyzed. Upon arriving home, Camilla's absence was a brutal reminder of her reality. The house, which once seemed like a home, was now just an empty place. Lucas's breathing was heavy as he walked through the halls, smelling the soft scent of her perfume still permeating the rooms. Every corner, every object that belonged to her, was a provocation. The silence in the house screamed in his head. He threw himself onto the couch, desperately trying to push away the images his mind was creating. He could imagine her, sitting with another man, laughing, with that sparkle in her eyes that he thought was reserved just for him. And then, a question hit him hard: who was this man? Lucas didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the lack of answers. His mind wandered, searching for clues, but he knew there was no way to get answers without confronting her. That's when he heard the sound of the door slowly opening. Lucas's heart accelerated. He jumped to his feet immediately, feeling a mixture of anger and expectation. Camila entered with hesitant steps, avoiding his eyes, as if she knew there was no escaping what was coming. She placed her bag on the table without saying a word. The weight of the silence between them was unbearable. Then, Lucas finally broke the silence, his voice cold and controlled, but his eyes burning with fury. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Or would you prefer to continue pretending that everything is fine? Camila looked up slowly, and Lucas could see the tension on her face, a mixture of fear and guilt. She knew that he knew. I knew there was no longer any way to disguise it. But at the same time, it seemed like something was stopping her from speaking. The words were stuck in his throat. Lucas, it's not, she started, but stopped. It's not what you think. He laughed, but it was a laugh without joy, without humor. Just the bitter sound of someone hurt deeply. Isn't that what I'm thinking? He repeated, with almost sarcastic incredulity. So what is it, Camila? What do you think I'm thinking? What do you think seeing my wife with another man in a restaurant would make me think? Camila lowered her head, unable to look at him. She seemed to search for the right words, something that could calm the storm that was already forming in Lucas's eyes, but nothing seemed to be enough. And he wouldn't wait for an excuse. Who is he? Lucas fired the question. The anger was overflowing, but there was still a twinge of pain that made him hesitate for a second. He wanted to know, needed to know who the man was who had his wife. Camila finally looked at him. Her eyes, once so sure, were now cloudy, filled with silent regret. But the words didn't come out. That silence was as clear an admission as anything else. Lucas felt his blood boil in his veins. I asked, who is he? His voice rose, and Camila backed away. The fear in her eyes made him realize how close he was to losing control. He's just a colleague, she began, but the weakness in her voice betrayed her attempt to soften the situation. It's someone from work, Lucas. It wasn't what you're imagining. I know how it seems, but... Lucas didn't let her finish. Isn't that what I'm imagining? He took a step towards her, his tone lower, but full of anger. So you're saying that meeting on the sly, going out for dinner at night, isn't what it seems? Don't make me look like an idiot, Camila. She tried to speak, but her words faltered, as if she knew that anything she said now would only make the situation worse. The weight of guilt was clear in his eyes, but there was more there. There was something that Lucas still couldn't understand, something that she seemed to guard, protecting him from a greater truth. But he wasn't interested in secrets. Not at that moment. For how long? The question came out before he could stop it, his voice breaking with pain. It was a question he never imagined he would have to ask. The sound of those words made him realize the gravity of where they were. It wasn't an ordinary couple's argument. This was the collapse of everything he knew. Camila hesitated, her silence saying more than any answer. Lucas, she tried, but was interrupted. For how long? He repeated, with raw pain in his voice, his eyes fixed on her, begging for an answer that could, in some way, justify what was happening. But he knew there was no justification. A few months, she finally whispered, and the word hung in the air like a sentence. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Lucas's feet. Months. So that was it. It wasn't something new, it wasn't a one-night mistake. It was a calculated, repeated betrayal. Every second of those months passed through his mind like a knife in the chest. He felt stupid, blind for not realizing it sooner. The silence between them stretched, thick, heavy. Lucas didn't know what else to say. Part of him wanted to scream, demand answers, but the other part was in shock. The world he knew, the life he built with Camila, was falling apart. Camila took a step forward, as if she wanted to touch him, but Lucas moved away. Her touch, which had once comforted him, now felt like a betrayal in itself. "Lucas. I didn't want it to be like this," she said, her voice breaking, and tears began to form in her eyes. "I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." He shook his head in disbelief. "You never wanted to hurt me?" he repeated. "And what do you think you did, Camila?" She didn't respond. "I couldn't." He knew that anything he said at that moment would only worsen the situation. And Lucas, in turn, knew there was no going back. He wanted to leave, get away from it all, but something kept him there. There was more, he could feel it. Something Camila wasn't saying yet. He knew that this betrayal was not the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. And he needed to find out what it was. The weight of Camila's last words still hung in the air. Months. The revelation had been a brutal blow, but Lucas knew that wasn't all. Something bigger was being kept secret, something she was trying hard not to reveal. And this hesitation, this uncertainty in Camila's eyes, was what tormented him most. The silence between them brought no comfort, it only fueled Lucas's growing need for answers. He needed to know. He needed to understand why his life was falling apart like this. Camila took a few steps back, as if physical distance could somehow protect her from what was to come. Lucas watched her with a fixed gaze, almost without blinking. He was no longer the man who trusted blindly, who believed in the strength of his marriage. Something about him had changed, and that change turned him into someone she didn't recognize. "Tell me the truth," Lucas's voice was low, but full of emotion. "All. Without sparing me." Camila swallowed. "I knew the moment I feared had arrived. There was no longer any way to avoid it, how to hide it." Lucas's words weren't a request, but a demand, and she knew she couldn't escape it. "The truth, Lucas," she began, her voice breaking slightly. "The truth is, it wasn't just dinner, like you think." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process. His anger, contained until then, began to bubble once more. He wanted to interrupt her, but he resisted. "I needed to hear everything." Letting her reveal every detail, even if it destroyed him. "It wasn't what I wanted to hide from you," Camila continued, her hands shaking. "I knew you suspected something, but," she hesitated, her eyes fixed on his, looking for a way out that didn't exist. "But dinner was about business. About something I didn't know how to tell you before. I was trying to solve a problem." Lucas frowned, his confusion mixing with the pain that was already consuming him. Business? How could that have anything to do with the betrayal that was tearing her marriage apart? He took a step forward, crossing his arms as if waiting for a revelation that he knew would hurt him even more. "What do you mean by business?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, although his patience was at its limit. "Are you saying that this man," he trailed off, his voice trailing off for a second before continuing. "That man you were having dinner with, does he have anything to do with this?" Camila nodded slowly, not daring to look away. Every word that came out of her mouth seemed to weigh more than she could bear. He has." His voice was now almost a whisper. "I didn't tell you before because I knew you wouldn't understand. And I know this feels like cheating, but I was trying to protect you." Those words hit Lucas hard. Protect you? How could she say that after everything? How could someone who was cheating on her husband talk about protection? He shook his head in disbelief, trying to keep control of his emotions. "Camila, stop stalling me and tell me at once," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "What kind of business? Why were you having dinner with another man? I want the truth. All of it." Camila squeezed her eyes shut, as if the words that came next were too difficult to say. She knew that moment would be definitive. That once he spoke, there would be no going back. She began, her voice trembling. Lucas, I owed a lot of money. Much more than you could imagine. Lucas took a step back, as if he had been punched. Debts? He knew that things with the gallery were not going well, but he had no idea that the situation had gotten so bad. And once again, he felt excluded, left in the dark. Debts? He repeated, not believing what he was hearing. Why didn't you tell me? Because I tried to solve it on my own. She took a deep breath, trying to find the words. I didn't want to worry you, I didn't want you to get involved. I thought I could do it. I thought I would figure it all out before it got out of hand. Lucas felt the ground move away. That revelation was not the betrayal he expected, but the betrayal it hid was of another nature. It was about trust, about keeping secrets from her husband, about making decisions without him. So, all this time, he whispered, starting to put the pieces together. You were trying to solve a financial problem, and that's why you approached this man. Camila nodded, tears silently streaming down her face. She knew that, despite everything, Lucas deserved to know what was really going on. He's an investor, Lucas. I was desperate. I didn't know who to turn to. The gallery was sinking, and she choked on the words. I made bad decisions. I took out loans, invested in things that didn't work out, and suddenly, we owed more than we could pay. I knew that if you knew, you would try to solve everything for me, but I didn't want you to carry that weight. Lucas felt a mixture of relief and pain. Relief that the physical betrayal he feared might not be what it seemed. But the pain came from the fact that, even if she hadn't betrayed him in the way he thought, she had still betrayed him in another way. He had lied, omitted, made decisions without him. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked, his voice shaking. Why did you think I couldn't handle knowing that? Because I felt like a failure. Camila replied, her voice full of regret. I didn't want you to see me as someone who couldn't deal with her own choices. I wanted to be strong, to show that I could take care of myself, of our life. But, everything got out of control. Lucas ran his hands through his hair, trying to process what he had just heard. He had always been the kind of man who faced difficulties head-on, but now, it was clear that his wife didn't trust him to share her struggles. He felt torn, a part of him understood Camila's fear, her desire to protect her marriage from financial worries. But the other part, the hurt and betrayed part, couldn't accept that she had made so many decisions without him. And this man? He asked, still not knowing what to feel. What does he have to do with this? Camila looked at him, and Lucas saw the truth reflected in her eyes. She took a deep breath, knowing the next revelation would be the hardest of all. I was trying to negotiate with him to save the gallery, she confessed, her voice barely managing to stay steady. He said he could help me, but he wanted something in return. Lucas's eyes widened, feeling his anger return with full force. He knew what she was about to say, but he needed to hear it. Something in return. He repeated, his voice cold as ice. And what did he ask for, Camila? Camila lowered her eyes, tears falling faster now. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. And then, finally, the words came out. He wanted me, to go out with him. That, it was something more than just business. Lucas stood still for a moment. Her words echoed in his mind, destroying any shred of confidence he might have had. Betrayal wasn't just the presence of another man. It was much more. And in that instant, he knew that everything he believed about his marriage had fallen apart. Lucas felt pain so deep that it was as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Camila's words echoed in her mind, like a hammer beating incessantly. He wanted me to go out with him, for it to be more than business. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an abyss of lies and secrets that he had fallen into without realizing it. His heart was crushed, and he could barely breathe at the confession he had just heard. "You," Lucas began, but his voice trailed off, his throat tight with emotions fighting to come out. "Have you considered that?" The words came out choppy, filled with disbelief and pain. He knew he needed to hear the truth, even if it completely destroyed him. Camila, now in tears, shook her head slowly, as if that simple movement could somehow soften the impact of what she was about to say. She tried to speak, but tears stopped her. She ran a hand nervously through her hair, desperate to find the right words. "I was desperate, Lucas. I didn't know what to do. The gallery was sinking, and I just wanted to save everything we built. I thought that, maybe I could, convince him another way, that it wouldn't have to come to this." Lucas felt a wave of anger pass through his body. His jaw clenched as he tried to control the urge to scream. He took a deep breath, but nothing seemed able to calm the storm inside him. "Did you think?" he repeated, his voice increasingly cold. "Did you think maybe you could convince him another way? Camila, you went there to have dinner with him, accepted his conditions, and now you're here telling me that you were trying to save our lives. What kind of salvation is this?" Camila flinched at Lucas's overflowing fury. The regret he felt was overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't take it back. There was no justification that could erase what he had done. "I never," she began, her voice shaking. "I've never been able to do that, Lucas. I swear I never got to," she choked on the words, unable to complete the sentence. "I was scared. I thought I could control the situation, but things got out of control." Lucas laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, filled with pain. He ran his hand over his face, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. "Control?" he repeated, incredulity clear in his voice. "What kind of control do you think you had, Camila? You put yourself in this situation, and now you expect me to believe that you were trying to fix everything for us?" Camila approached slowly, her eyes swollen from crying, her trembling hand extended towards Lucas. "Please, Lucas," she begged. "I was trying to protect you, protect us. I know I made a mistake, I know I should have told you everything from the beginning. But I was afraid. Fear of losing you, fear of you not forgiving me." Lucas took a step back, avoiding her touch, as if simple physical contact was intolerable at that moment. "Lose me?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Camila, you've already lost me. Don't you understand? By hiding this from me, by lying, by leaving me in the dark while you made deals behind my back, you lost me. This is not marriage. That's not trust." Camila sobbed softly, knowing that her words couldn't reach Lucas. He was devastated, and she knew she had caused it. She desperately wanted to go back in time, to make different choices. But now, all that was left was the chaos she had caused. "Lucas," his voice was an unspoken request for forgiveness, but he didn't want to hear it. "Don't call me." He interrupted her, his gaze hardened, as if every word she said was another stab in his heart. "You deceived me, Camila. Maybe you didn't sleep with him, but what did you do?" He trailed off, his voice trailing off momentarily. "What you did is enough to destroy me." The silence that followed was devastating. Lucas turned his back to her, his thoughts spinning in a whirlwind. He needed space, he needed to breathe, but the air in that room was too heavy. The marriage he believed to be solid now seemed like a fragile lie, something he barely recognized. "Lucas, please," Camila tried again, her voice desperate. "Please, what?" He turned quickly, his voice now filled with suppressed anger. "What do you expect me to do? That I just forget all this? For me to pretend nothing happened? You betrayed me in every way that matters, Camila. And now you want me to understand that I forgive you?" Camila lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. She knew that asking for forgiveness would be useless, but she couldn't help it. Despair grew inside her. I never wanted to hurt you, Lucas. I know I failed you, but I love you. I have always loved you. I was just trying. I just wanted to. She couldn't finish the sentence, as if each word was more painful than the last. Lucas ran his hand through his hair, trying to find some clarity in the midst of that storm of emotions. He was hurt, betrayed, but he was also tired. Tired of fighting a situation that seemed to have no solution. Love? He repeated, bitterly. If this is love, I don't want it anymore. I don't know what that means anymore. Camila was sobbing silently now, the tears flowing out of control. She knew she had lost Lucas. He knew that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't undo what he had done. Silence reigned in the room again. Lucas walked away again, his thoughts still confused. He didn't know what to do, he didn't know how to react. All he knew was that the love he thought he had was ruined. There was no more trust, there was no more truth. All that remained were lies and secrets that had destroyed everything. He looked at Camila once again, but now, she seemed distant. She was no longer the woman he had married. She was a stranger, someone he barely recognized. Without saying anything else, Lucas took the car keys and left the house. He needed air. He needed to escape the weight of that betrayal that suffocated him. As the door closed behind him, Camila collapsed to the floor, overcome with regret. She knew there was no turning back. And as Lucas drove through the streets, the sound of the engine was the only thing that filled the emptiness he felt. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get as far away from it all as possible. From Camila. Of betrayal. From the past. What would come next, he didn't know. But at that moment, all he wanted was to forget. The sound of the engine roared as Lucas sped through the dark streets, the road in front of him illuminated only by the headlights of his car. The world around him seemed to move in slow motion as his mind spun aimlessly, lost between anger, disappointment, and overwhelming sadness. With every kilometer, he moved further away from the house that, until a few hours ago, he called home. The house where he lived with Camila, the woman who was now just a shadow of what he thought he knew. The silence inside the car was deafening, and Lucas could barely deal with the thoughts that were piling up in his mind. He didn't know where he was going. There was no destination. I just knew I needed space, time. He needed to breathe, away from everything that suffocated him. The last few minutes at home had been devastating. The image of Camila, crying, begging for forgiveness, was still etched in his mind. But forgiveness seemed unattainable at that moment. How could he forgive her, after everything? How could he accept that the woman he trusted most, the person he shared his life with, had hidden so much? The betrayal, even if it wasn't physical, was still a betrayal of everything they had built together. The car stopped abruptly in a deserted spot on the road. Lucas turned off the engine, but remained there, with his hands on the steering wheel, breathing heavily. His chest felt tight, as if the anger and pain were too much to bear. His eyes were glazed over in the darkness before him, but his mind was elsewhere, immersed in confusion that seemed to have no end. It was hard to believe that everything had fallen apart so quickly. In recent years, Lucas had seen small changes in Camila, but he never imagined things would reach this point. She had gradually moved away from him, and he, immersed in work, perhaps hadn't realized how much she was struggling alone. The guilt began to mix with the pain, but he quickly pushed aside any thought that could justify what Camila did. Nothing justified such deep secrets. He tried to concentrate, to think about what he would do next. Part of him wanted to confront her again, wanted to go back and demand more answers. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't get him anywhere. Camila had already said everything that needed to be said. She was involved with another man, even though, according to her, it was nothing more than meetings behind closed doors. She had made promises to him in exchange for saving her own skin, and perhaps their marriage as well. But what was the true price of this? And how could they move forward after such a cruel truth? Lucas unfastened his seatbelt and got out of the car, breathing in the cold night air. He needed to step away from the pain for a moment, to feel the wind against his face, something to remind him that it was still there, that it was still real, despite everything. He walked a few meters along the empty road, feeling the weight of his own decisions. The path ahead seemed uncertain, and doubt was the only certainty he had. Why had Camila reached this point? Lucas always believed that if there was a problem, they would deal with it together. He never imagined that she would carry this burden alone, hiding so much from him. And now, everything was on the verge of collapse. He wondered if there was any way to save the marriage, or if everything was already doomed from the moment Camila decided to follow that path. Memories of the two began to come back to his mind. They were happy, weren't they? When they met, the connection was immediate. Lucas remembered the sparkle in her eyes when they talked about the future, about the plans they would make together. Camila was always full of life, and that was one of the things he loved most about her. But over time, something was lost. The brilliance he admired so much seemed to diminish, until it disappeared completely. He blamed himself for this, in part. Maybe he had moved away, maybe he wasn't present enough. But did that justify what she did? Could loneliness, fear, really be the reason for someone to betray the trust of the person they loved most? This dilemma began to eat away at Lucas inside, leaving him at an emotional crossroads. The phone in Lucas's pocket vibrated, breaking him out of his thoughts. He hesitated for a moment before taking out the device and looking at the screen. Camila's name appeared, and he stood still, staring at the phone as if it were a foreign object, something he no longer knew how to handle. She had already sent several messages, and now she was calling, probably desperate to fix what was broken. Lucas ignored the call. He didn't want to hear anything else at that moment. Her words, however contrite, could not erase what had been said. He needed time to process, to understand what he really felt. And maybe, deep down, he knew he wasn't ready for reconciliation, if that was even possible. Walking back to the car, Lucas began to question his own reactions. Was it possible to forgive someone who hid so much? Someone who made decisions that affected both of their lives without even consulting their partner? The moral dilemma before him was complex. He knew that the love he felt for Camila would not disappear overnight, but he also knew that that love was now tainted by a distrust that would be difficult to dispel. Sitting back in the driver's seat, Lucas looked at the empty road in front of him and thought about how he had gotten there. Every choice, every decision that had brought them to this moment now seemed to be under a magnifying glass. And, although he didn't want to admit it, he knew that he also had responsibility for the distance that was created between the two. But to what extent did one person's responsibility justify the other's mistakes? Could he forgive the fact that, at the most crucial moment of her life, Camila had turned to another man in search of a solution? And, more importantly, could he live with this emotional betrayal, even if it wasn't physical? The car remained stopped for a few more minutes while Lucas pondered these questions. The thought of going home and facing Camila seemed overwhelming, but he knew he would eventually have to face the situation. There was nowhere else to run. And on some level, he knew that despite all the pain, he still loved Camila. Which left him with the hardest question of all: would love be enough to overcome what happened? Lucas parked the car in front of the house, but stayed inside the vehicle for a while, looking at the familiar facade, now so different. The darkness of the night contrasted with the lights on in the windows, and he knew that Camila was inside, waiting for him, perhaps still crying, perhaps trying to find the right words to justify what she had done. The idea of walking through that door seemed unbearable. How could he go back to being the man he was before? How could I look at Camila without remembering every lie, every secret she kept silent? But eventually, he knew he would have to face reality. He took a deep breath, got out of the car and walked slowly to the door, feeling as if each step was an additional weight on his shoulders. When he entered, the silence of the house was the first to welcome him. The clock on the wall made a low, constant sound, marking time that seemed to be stagnant. Camilla was sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying, her hands clasped in her lap as if she was trying to hold on to what was left of her life. When she saw Lucas enter, she stood up immediately, but said nothing. The silence between them was thick, full of unspoken words and emotions that were on the verge of exploding. Lucas remained near the door, not knowing how to start. He didn't want an argument. In fact, I was tired of everything. Tired of trying to understand, tired of looking for answers that might never come. The love he felt for Camilla was there, buried beneath layers of pain and mistrust. But he didn't know if that love would be enough to heal the wounds. "I love you, Lucas," Camilla finally broke the silence, her voice weak but firm. "I know that everything I did was a terrible mistake, and I know that you will probably never forgive me. But I needed to tell you this. I still love you. I always loved it." Her words hit Lucas with a force he hadn't expected. Love. She still loved him. And him? Could the love he felt for her, that love he had built over so many years, survive what had happened? He shook his head, trying to clear away the chaos in his mind. "Camilla, I don't know if love is enough right now," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "What you did, it wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the gallery. You betrayed me in a way I don't know if I can overcome. It's not just about trusting yourself again. It's about trusting myself, trusting that I'll be able to forget all this." Camilla started crying again, but this time she didn't try to get closer. She knew that Lucas' words came from a deep place, from someone who had been torn in half and didn't know if he could pull himself together. "I wanted to protect you so much," she said, between sobs. "I wanted to solve everything alone because I thought you didn't need that burden. But I was the one who brought the greatest weight to our marriage. I was the one who ruined everything." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. He knew there was truth in her words. I knew Camilla truly believed she was doing what was best. But that didn't make things any easier. "Maybe," he began, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Maybe the problem is that we both grew apart. I buried myself in work, you lost yourself in your worries. And now, here we are, broken. But, Camilla, I don't know how to fix this." Silence returned to the room, until Lucas finally sat down on the sofa, exhausted. Camilla stood still for a moment, not knowing what to do, until she slowly sat down next to him, keeping a safe, respectful distance, as if she were afraid of breaking any small thread of hope that still remained between them. Lucas looked at her, feeling a mix of sadness and affection. He still saw the woman he loved, but that woman was now covered in the scars of everything they had been through. "I thought a lot while I was away," he said, breaking the silence. "I thought about us, about what we were before and what we have become. And I think, we're both to blame. I wasn't there like I should have been, I didn't realize how much you were struggling. But you," he stopped for a moment, swallowing hard. "You made decisions that destroyed the trust we had." Camilla nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face. "I know," she said, her voice weak. "I know that what I did is unforgivable. And I don't expect you to forgive me now, or maybe ever. But I just wanted you to know that I would do anything to make this right. Anything." Lucas sighed. He knew that even with all the pain, love was still there, somehow. But would this love be enough? He didn't know. The future seemed uncertain, and the road to healing was long. "I don't know if we can fix this, Camilla," he admitted, his tone softer now. "But I think I'm willing to try. I don't promise it will be easy, or that we will go back to what we were. But maybe we can find a way to move forward." Camilla looked at him in surprise, a spark of hope appearing in her eyes. Do you really think we can?" Lucas gave a small smile, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of resignation, of acceptance of the reality they faced. I don't know, he said honestly. But I think it's worth a try. At least, we owe it to ourselves. They remained silent for a few more minutes, sitting side by side but separated by a gulf that might never be completely filled. But at that moment, there was a small possibility of reconstruction. And, as difficult as it was, Lucas knew he was willing to take that step. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing would be like before. But somehow, they still had something to hold on to. Maybe it was love, maybe it was just the desire to not let everything end like this. Either way, the future lay ahead of them, uncertain, but with a slight possibility of redemption. Now that we've reached the end of the story, tell me what you think. Leave your comment and share your opinion about the story. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more impactful stories like this. Remember, the channel does not support any type of cheating. Stories like this are created to reflect on the impact of the choices we make and how they affect our lives.